There have been great discoveries. They changed the course of human history. They propelled human society toward extraordinary development. But on the other hand, there have also been discoveries. They harbored unimaginably dark elements. The vilest and most evil things. So terrible that even the most wicked could not have imagined them. That is precisely the event of Columbus discovering America. An event that changed the history of humanity. Once and forever. May 29th, 1453. A fateful day that completely changed the course of human history. Constantinople, the heart of Eastern Christianity, a city once deemed impregnable, is falling. When Sultan Mehmed II stepped through the shattered gates, he didn't just conquer a city. He sealed the gateway to Europe. For thousands of years, the Silk Road had carried gold, silk, and, most importantly, spices from the east to the west. But now, that gateway was closed. An iron curtain had fallen. The Ottoman Empire now controlled the entire economic lifeline between Asia and Europe. They imposed crippling taxes or simply enforced embargoes. Europe plunged into economic panic. The nobility trembled, not out of fear of death, but out of fear of a life without spices. To understand why Columbus set sail, you have to understand the stomach of a 15th century European. There were no refrigerators back then. Preserving meat was a nightmare. When winter came, livestock were slaughtered en masse, and the meat was salted. But salted meat was unbearably salty and foul-smelling. There was only one thing that could save it. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. They were more than just spices. They were medicine, preservatives, and symbols of status. A bag of black pepper was worth as much as a bag of pure gold. You could use pepper to pay rent, to pay taxes, or to bribe a judge. But now, the supply had been cut off. Spice prices skyrocketed by 1.000%. The treasuries of Venice, Genoa, and Lisbon were drying up. Europe faced two choices. 1. Accept poverty and isolation. 2. Find another route. A route that did not pass through Muslim lands. The Portuguese chose to go south. They believed that if they could sail around the southern tip of Africa, they would reach India. It was a safe, slow, and logical strategy. But in Genoa, there was a middle-aged sailor who didn't care for safety. His name was Cristoforo Colombo, or Christopher Columbus. Columbus was no great scholar. He was self-taught, a dreamer, and a firm believer in destiny. He was obsessed with an idea that the experts of his time called suicidal. He wanted to sail west. Let's clear up a common historical misconception. People back then knew the Earth was round. The issue wasn't the shape, it was the size. Mathematicians had calculated the Earth's circumference to be around 40.000 kilometers. But Columbus, relying on the faulty calculations of an Arab geographer, Alfraganus, and his own blind optimism, believed the Earth was much smaller. He thought Japan was only about 4.000 kilometers from Portugal, a distance he believed could be sailed. The reality? That distance was 5 times greater than he thought. Had the Americas not been in the way, Columbus and his crew would have died of thirst in the middle of the ocean long before reaching the shores of Japan. His mathematical ignorance, ironically, became the key to history. Columbus took his idea and shopped it around Europe. Portugal said no. England said no. France said no. Everyone thought he was mad. His final stop was Spain. In 1492, Spain had just completed the Reconquista, driving the last Muslim Moors out of Granada. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were victors, but they were bankrupt victors. The treasury was empty. They needed gold to pay off war debts. They needed prestige to compete with Portugal. And then Columbus appeared, promising mountains of gold and the conversion of millions of souls in the East. A deal was made. It was called the Santa Fe Agreement. This wasn't just a scientific expedition. It was a high-risk business contract. Columbus made enormous demands. The title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy over all lands he discovered, and 10% of all revenues from any goods brought back. The Queen agreed. Why not? If Columbus died at sea, she would lose only 3 old ships and a bit of spare change. But if he succeeded, Spain would own the world. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. And Isabella placed her bet on the madman from Genoa. On August 3, 1492, the fleet set sail. The first few weeks passed smoothly. The trade winds carried them swiftly westward. Columbus was pleased. He believed God was guiding their way. But by the 4th, 5th week, still no land in sight. Fear began to creep in. The sailors weren't afraid of storms. They feared something far worse, the wind. The wind was always blowing westward. How would they return? They believed they were sliding down the slope of the earth, and that they would never be able to climb back up again. Columbus had to resort to his first political tactic, deception. He kept 2 logbooks. One recorded the real distance traveled. The other, shared with the crew, always showed a shorter distance to calm their nerves. On October 10th, a mutiny nearly broke out. The crew gave him an ultimatum: turn back or die. Columbus begged for 3 more days. Just 3 more days. On the night of October 11th, in the early hours of October 12th, 1492, 2 a.m., under the pale moonlight, Rodrigo de Triana shouted the words that would tear through the fabric of history. Tierra, tierra. Columbus dropped to his knees on the deck. He was certain it was Japan. He believed he was about to meet the Great Khan of China. He had no idea that the dark silhouette before him was the edge of a vast continent, home to 60 million people who had never heard the name of Jesus Christ. On the morning of October 12th, Columbus set foot on an island the locals called Guanahani. He renamed it San Salvador, a symbolic yet arrogant act, erasing the old name to impose a new order. The people who came to greet Columbus were not Chinese silk merchants. They were not Japanese officials. They were the Taino, a branch of the Arawak people. Convinced he had reached India, Columbus called them Indios, a tragic mistake that would cling to history for the next 500 years. In his journal, Columbus described the Taino people with a tone of condescension. They trade everything they have with the greatest goodwill. They are well built, with handsome faces. But immediately following these compliments came the cold calculation of a slave trader. He continued, "They would make fine servants. With just 50 men, we could subjugate all of them and make them do whatever we want." In the very moment of discovery, the enslavement of the Taino people was already written on Columbus's own page. Columbus didn't come here to explore. He came for gold. When he saw small bits of gold on the noses of the natives, a gold fever began to consume the expedition. The naive Taino pointed south, toward larger islands. The sightseeing was over. Columbus kidnapped several natives to use as guides. The ships zigzagged frantically through the Caribbean. On every new island, Columbus planted a flag and claimed it for Spain, regardless of the fact that it already had owners. But tragedy struck. On Christmas night, 1492, the flagship Santa Maria ran aground on a coral reef and sank. With only 2 ships left, there wasn't enough space to bring the entire crew back to Europe. Columbus had to make a fateful decision. He left 39 men behind on the island of Hispaniola. He built a fort from the wreckage of the ship and named it La Navidad. This was the first European settlement in the New World since the Vikings. Columbus sailed back to Spain to claim glory, leaving behind 39 ambassadors of European civilization. As soon as Columbus disappeared over the horizon, those men began looting native women and plundering their gold. Columbus returned to Spain a hero. He presented the queen with a few Taino captives, some parrots, and a bit of gold. That was enough. In September 1493, he returned to the New World. This time not with 3 battered ships, but with a fleet of 17. The goal was no longer exploration. The goal was colonization. But when he arrived at La Navidad, all he found was ashes. The 39 soldiers he had left behind were all dead. Why? Because they had brutally raped women and plundered the local population to such an extent that even the peaceful Taino were forced to take up arms and fight back. This event shattered the illusion of the noble savage. From that moment on, Columbus saw the natives not as potential allies, but as enemies to be subdued. Columbus turned to tactics of terror. He used cavalry and, most notably, war dogs, beasts trained to tear human beings apart. But the most frightening weapon was an economic system, encomienda. Under pressure to repay the crown, Columbus created a brutal tribute regime. Every Taino over the age of 14 had to deliver a specific amount of gold dust every 3 months. Those who met the quota were given a copper token to wear around their neck, a receipt. Those who failed, the punishment was amputation of the hands. Their severed hands were hung around their necks, and they were sent back to their villages as a warning. Thousands died from blood loss or infection. Others chose mass suicide with cassava poison to escape this earthly hell. Amid the darkness, a faint light flickered. Bartolomé de las Casas. He, too, began as a conquistador and slaveholder. But after witnessing the extreme brutality of his fellow countrymen, he changed. He devoted the rest of his life to lobbying the Spanish court, denouncing the crimes of Columbus and his successors. His writings remain the most powerful historical evidence. They acted like ravenous wolves attacking a gentle flock of sheep. They killed, terrorized, and destroyed for one purpose only: gold. Thanks to Las Casas, these atrocities were not buried in oblivion. Columbus's rule was so brutal that even the King of Spain could not tolerate it. In 1500, he was stripped of power, chained like a criminal, and sent back to Spain. Though later released and allowed to make 2 more voyages, he never regained political authority. Columbus died in 1506, wealthy but bitter, still convinced he had found Asia.